start the recording. Well, guys, today is going to be an all-inclusive one. We're going to go through, some of it is going to be refresher. So most of it is going to be us going over in detail user groups, authentication using firewall policies, and authenticating through captive portal. Okay. And then we'll go over, a little bit of troubleshooting, what have you, and then we're gonna call it a wrap. So let's talk about the lab, right? So, per request, Don wanted to see how it looks to authenticate, via authenticate users via, using a server, but going over IPSec Tunnel, right, and how that works. So we're gonna try to cover all of this all in one, right? I did some pre-configuration, but I did not cover pre-configuration of, certain things. So we're going to do it all in-house, okay? So we have Fortigate 2 and Fortigate 3, right? There is no routes to their private network on each of them, right? So we're going to create a IPSec tunnel, right? We're going to go ahead and create a IPSec tunnel between both of them, okay? And so there won't be no routes that state their private networks, okay? And we're going to have that Windows server. It's going to be the authenticator for both the Fortigate 2 and Fortigate 3. And we have, we have two types of PCs. We have a Windows PC on the right, it'll be PC 8. And we have one of our SOC analysts, right? Her name is Mikevia, right? And she has brought her Linux PC, aka a Kali Linux PC, to go ahead and come in and, browse internet and stuff like that. And she's actually doing some pen testing to see if things are actually working as they should within our networks, okay? So before we do anything, right, we need to follow a order of operations. So first we need to go ahead and configure this IPSec tunnel. So let's go ahead and do that first, all right? So let's go ahead and pull this up, right? Dot 103 is Fortigate 2, dot 146, and my home local network is 146. So we're gonna log into the first one and get that configured, okay? We have not covered IPSec tunnels. We haven't covered that yet, so I will be speeding through this configuration, right? If you have any questions, please, save them for until we get to that section, okay? To Fortigate, all right, we are on, we're gonna call it to Fortigate 2, right? And I'm gonna go ahead and put that remote IP, which should be 4.5.2. I'm sorry. Yeah, .2. All right. And we're going to call it 2. Okay. And I am going to put share the key. All right. Because they need to share a key between each other. All right. Local network, I'm going to put the LAN. Right. And the remote subnet, I'm going to put that manually. It's going to be 10.10.1.0/24. And I'm putting the Fortigate's 2 private IP network, their LAN. Okay. All right. Go ahead and create that. And that's good to go. I'm also going to go ahead and set static route, right, to, if you guys remember the topology, we'll look at it again, to ISP1, right? So it knows where to go. There we go. All right, so that's set up, right? So the IPSec tunnel set up. Let's go ahead and do it on the other side. All right. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and log in. Right, and now I'm logging into Fortigate 2, right? Let's go ahead and set this up first. Pretty easy, right? And you guys are probably wondering why I'm knocking this out first, right? So, routing and switching is the basis of everything, right? Before we dive into things like IPSec tunnel, VIRP, and et cetera, right? Because they need to know where to go, right? Every source needs a destination, okay? So we're setting that up first, right? And now we can go ahead and set up our tunnel, right? And I'm going to call this, right, in respective to the other one. I'm going to call this to Fortigate 3. Okay. All right. Remote address, that's going to be the 6.5.2.2 network, right? We're going to call it, we're going to go through port 2, right? All right, got that pre-shared key. Local interface is going to be that LAN port, right? And the remote network is going to be 172.16.1.0. Okay. All right, so we got that set. We're going to say create. All right. Now that we have that settled, right? Let's confirm, right? Static route. And let's go ahead and take a look at the dashboard. All right. Typically, when you go to dashboard, you click on the network section. We can go ahead and take a look at the IPSec tunnel. Right. Let's go ahead and try to bring it up. It should come up. All right. And it looks like it's not. Let's make sure that we have all that settled, all that good to go. And let's check our configuration again. So we're on Fortigate 3, 6.5. And you know what? One thing you guys will learn is that we need to go ahead and make a few changes, because even though we have it here, there are some things that are not available with the free version of this iOS, right? So we need to go ahead and disable PFS, right? We got all that settled. That's good to go. All right, good to go. Set up all negotiate, and then we should be good to go. Let's do the same thing on the other side. All right, let's go over here. All right, there we go. All right, so we're going to convert it to custom tunnel. All right, remote gateway, Fortigate 3, that looks good. That looks good. That looks good. Let's go ahead and change this. PFS is probably enabled. And by the way, guys, little Easter egg, before we talk about it in the future, PFS, even going through ISPs like in a live environment, typically doesn't work. You literally have to have them allow it, right? So PFS is typically not used, right? Those Diffie-Hellman groups within PFS typically don't work. So let's go back. Right, let's go ahead and check it, and let's see what's going on. All right, so we're getting errors. Something's not working. Let's go ahead and troubleshoot this bad boy. 6522, right? And let's just make sure layer 1, 2, and 3 looks fine. Okay, all right. So layer 2, that's layer 1, layer 2, that's fine. 4.5.2.2. 4.5, I'm on switch to 4.5.2.2. That looks fine. 4.5.2.1. That looks good. All right. And let's check this configuration. Let's check that. 6.5.2.2. And let's take a look at that. 6.5.2.1. All right. And let's check our switch, because we have a Cisco switch that's in the middle. All right. All right. Let's check our routing table. There we go. Show IP interface brief. All right. So let's do a ping. 4.5.2.1. There we go. Let's do the same thing. 6.5.2.1. There we go. All right. So that looks good. All right. So now let's go ahead and take a look, because typically the logs will tell us what's going on. All right. And we should have firewall policies. That's allowing it. Perfect. Let's go ahead and capture that. There we go. All right. Let's take a look at the we go. And let's look at VPN. All right, perfect. So it's stuck at phase 1, right? Let's just go ahead and put in our password again, because maybe I fat fingered it. That's a possibility. All right, let's go ahead and do that. All right, and let's do that again on both sides. All right. All right. Now, let's go ahead and check it. Let's see what's going on. Okay. All right. Let's check to see what's going on. Doing some troubleshooting, guys. All right. Okay, that looks good. That's fine. Okay. Let's take a look at that. All right. All right. All right. Let's delete that. That looks good. All right. Let's do that. All right. Let's take a look. All right. All right. Let's see what's going on. All right. All right. Negotiation looks good. It's fine. That looks good. That looks good. All right. Let's do some packet captures to see what's going on. All right. Give me 1 second. All right. All right. Okay. Let's force that. There we go. Okay. And let's do graphic. Let's test that. Let's do some pigs. Execute. 6.5.2.2. Let's, and that didn't work. So let's make some static routes. All right. So 6.5.2.0, 5.5. There we go. Gateway 4.5.2.1. There we go. There we go. Let's do the same thing. Let's make some static routes. And let's do 4.5.2.0, 55.55.0. And we're going to do gateway address. We're going to do 6.5.2.1. Boom. Okay. All right. Now that we have direct routes, let's check our packet capture. Let's go ahead and take a look Go to IPSec Tunnel. Oh, now we got a reply. Now we have a reply. So let's go ahead and test this, right? So we're on Fortigate 2, right? And let me give you guys another sneak peek of the topology, right? Go ahead and burn this in your memory, right? We have 10.10.1.0/24, right? That's the LAN side of Fortigate 2, right? The WAN side is a 4.5.2.0/24, okay? On Fortigate 3, on their LAN side is a 172.16.1.0/24, right? And on their WAN side is a 6.5.2.0/24, right? And there's a ISP, right, router, right, that's in between the both of them, right, different subnets, right? And there's IPSec tunnel now that has been established between the both of them, right? Even though we went ahead and configured it, you guys know my favorite saying, right? Trust but verify. We're going to go ahead and verify that there is connectivity between both of their private networks, right? By doing some layer 3 reachability, and we're going to do some pings. So we're on Fortigate 2, right? And we're going to do private network to private network pings, right? So we're going to do an execute ping. We're going to do ping options, right? Because I want to go ahead and test the inside interface. So we're going to do a 10.10.1.1, right? That's the interface of port 3 on Fortigate 2 that's facing the LAN, right? Then we're going to do a ping, execute ping, and we're going to do a 172.16.1.1, and that is port 3 off of Fortigate 3, right, on their LAN side, right? That's success, right? We see those pings coming through, and we actually have our packet captures, right, to go ahead and tell us. If I go ahead and do, right, and show that, we should have that. Let me, perfect, right? We see that traffic coming through, and things like pings or what have you, they're going to come in like this whenever traffic is traversing through, right? Because they're encapsulated by that tunnel, right? We're not going to get too deep into IPsec, but we know it's working, okay? Now, right, what are we going to do, right? We need to go ahead and configure, right, remote authentication. We need to go ahead and set that up. So just like before, we're going to go ahead and we're on Fortigate 3, and we're going to go ahead and configure that Windows server, right? Because right here, right, our Windows server lives all the way on the other side of that tunnel, right, on the 10.10.1.0/24 network. So let's go ahead and make that change, right? So we're on Fortigate 3. We're going to go to LDAP servers. We're going to still stick with LDAP, all right? And you know what? We did LDAP last time. We'll do radius, right? We're going to call this WinServe 01. Well, if I can spell server right, and we'll call it 01, right? And that IP is going to be 10.10.1.25. Okay. And we are going to call it, right, 10.10.1.25. And we're going to give it a password between the two, right? And I'm going to go ahead and click OK, all right? We're going to go back in it, right? Because, of course, we still need to test connectivity. It should fail because I have not programmed the Windows server to be a radius server just yet. So let's go ahead and do that, all right? Again, you guys being network security engineers, I do not expect you guys to memorize this, right? Because this, if you guys working inside of an organization, right, you guys typically would get help from your server team. But go ahead and take a look how I'm doing this, because you guys may have to go ahead and configure this on your own. Because again, you guys being network security engineers, you will have to also know Windows networking, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and add that role of network policy and access server. That's going to do, that is going to go ahead and help us enable radius, right? We're going to go ahead and hit next, 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 next. Restart destination server if needed. We're going to go ahead and install it, right? And we're going to go ahead and let Windows install it, right? we're going to go ahead and follow all these steps, right? Because all of these steps are required if you're going to go ahead and set up remote authentication, right? All right, so you'll probably be in, some server if you guys go ahead and set this up, right? So you guys that are working, right, maybe that are working at MSP or you're working for an organization, these are some questions you guys will have to ask, right? Okay, perfect. You guys want remote authentication, right? Here are some of the things I need, right? I need the remote IP, right? I need the, what protocol are we using, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So a couple of things that we need. We're going to go ahead and this should be done, right? It's telling us installation has been succeeded. We're going to close and we're going to go to the actual, tool, right? All right, so we have this set up, right? We're going to go to, let me go ahead and bridge this out and we're going to go ahead and go to Radius clients, all right? And what we're going to do is add a Radius client, right? And we're going to call this, right, is going to be Fortigate _3, right? And we are going to use that inside interface, right? 172.16.1.1, right? And you guys are probably thinking why? Well, right, we're going to use the private IP address because one, we want to make sure that it is going through that tunnel and it's secure, right? We don't want to just send things like, a Radius authentication or LDAP authentication through the internet, right? Between two remote sites, right? Unencrypted. IPSec Tunnel goes ahead and locks it down and gives you the extra layer of protection, okay? So we've set the friendly name, right? We've set the IP address. Now we're going to go ahead and set that shared secret, okay? We're going to set it to that same secret that we set on that FortiGate, okay? We're going to click OK, right? And so that's what we just need to go ahead and do for now, right? We're going to go ahead and we're going to minimize this. And we are going to go ahead and do one more thing on the FortiGate, right? Because there's one more thing we need to do. We are going to go ahead, give me one moment, big. We need to make one change. There we go. All right. All right. So we're going to, there we go. All right. And we're going to set, all right. And that source is going to be 172.16.1.1, right? Because we want it to come, these requests to come from inside, okay? We're going to do a show, right? And we see our configuration is right here, okay? So we're going to go ahead and lower this. All right, perfect. So we're successful, right? Now we have our connection set up. And you see now it's successful because we went ahead and set that source to the inside interface, okay? So we're going to go ahead and close it, right? And we're going to go ahead and set, okay, we haven't set user credentials yet, right? Let's go ahead. Everything is perfect. Everything's good to go. So we're using Radius. We got that set up, okay? Let's go ahead and do this here as well. All right. While I'm doing this configuration, any questions so far?
None so far.
Okay, cool. All right, let's go ahead and set up that Radius server. Now to let you guys take a look. All right, I'm gonna do the same config, right? We're gonna do a 10.10.1.25, right? And we're gonna do 10.10.1.25, right? Perfect, right? We're gonna hit OK. And this should fail, right? Right, and the reason why it failed is because I need to configure this as a radius client on the server, right? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna go ahead and add, all right, FortiGate 2 as a radius client. We'll do 10.10.1.1, right? And let's go ahead and put in that shared secret. Do it again. Perfect. All right, so we are good to go, right? So that's set up. So now if we test connectivity, now we're good to go. We didn't have to do the source IP because what, right? Right, from a routing and switching standpoint, they live in the same broadcast domain, right? Or the same network. So we don't need to source it, right? Because it's not going over a tunnel, et cetera, et cetera. So we're good to go, right? All of this is set up greatly, right? So now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about user groups, okay? So there's 4 types of user groups, right? You have your firewall user group. You have your Fortinet single sign-on, right, user group. You have your radius single sign-on group, and you also have your guest sign-on group, right? And so typically these are, right, they're specific, right? They're specific to a role, right? Firewall user groups, right? They don't need to match any type of group that exists on the server. Okay, so if Don says calls the user group on the FortiGate, right? Carisha's kids, right? But Mykevia goes ahead and has the user group in the Windows server called the Beehive, right? They don't need to match. We just need to make sure we are sourcing, right, the actual group in Windows Server. We need to make sure that's correct, right? And so with that, we're going to go ahead and configure that right now. So let's go ahead and call this. Did I spell her name right, Don? All good?
Oh yeah, you did. You got it right. Right on.
We'll call it Carisha's crew. Well, I can't put special
You
character.
can say Carisha, please.
All right, we're going to call it Carisha, please. All right. And we need to first go ahead and create the Beehive on the server. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. So same thing as before, right? We got this set up. We're going to go here. We're going to go ahead and create that group, right? And Mykevia, how do you spell the Beehive or Beehive? Is it B-E-E hive or is it B-E-Y?
B-E-Y-H-I-V-E.
Okay, I'm sorry. Jesus. All right, let's go ahead and set that. All right. And let's go ahead and set up Mykevia as a user. All right. There we go. All right, so we got her set up. Right. Let's go ahead and give her a password. Oops. There we go. Let's go ahead and give her a password. Perfect. All right, let's hit next, hit OK. We're good to go, right? So now let's go ahead and add a remote, right? Radius server, we're gonna use that, right? And let's go ahead and specify the group. Say here, let's call this the, right? And we can add more groups, but we'll keep it here, right? Let's say OK. All right, perfect. So we have this set up, okay? So now let's go ahead and let's do a few things. Now that we have this set up, we are now going to configure some policies. All right. And by the way, any questions on user groups, right? User groups, if you go through your study guide, it's a pretty short session, right? again, we have, like I told you, we have our firewall group, we have our guest group, we have our FSSO, which of course is the Fortinet single sign-on group that of course needs a token and a 40 token or a token of your choosing, right? If you're running an enterprise, maybe you like Duo, maybe you like Windows Authenticator or Google Authenticator. You can use any of these, right, as a single sign-on tool. Or if you do use the RSSO, right, the Radius single sign-on, right, we're using a Radius server, but we're not implementing certificates, right? Or 802.1x, okay? Us not implementing that, our users aren't going to be using single sign-on. So we don't have to worry about that, right? So we're just gonna go ahead and if we go back to our configuration, right? We don't have any special setup, right? So Carisha, please, it's just a firewall group. That's it, right? We didn't set it up as any of the others, right? Of course, if we set up a guest user, right, it's just a temporary user, right? And we don't need to go ahead and set that. We're setting Carisha, please. Everybody that's a part of Carisha, please, has permanent users, right, to access the firewall, okay? So let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and configure some firewall policies, okay? Right, so we're on FortiGate 2, right? Of course, we have our VPN, but let's go ahead and create a northbound policy, right? Right, and let's say, right, LAN port to, of course, WAN. All right, and we are going to go ahead and say, Carisha, please. All right, and we're going to go ahead and create a address group, which, of course, is this, right? And this is our local network, right? And let me go ahead and show you guys. Right, if we go here, it's a 10.10.1.0, right? Because whenever we use a user group within a policy, we need to go ahead and make sure we assign it we associate it with the subnet as well. Okay, let's go ahead and click all, right? Set that up. All protocols, we're good to go. We can specify the protocols, right? So again, as a review, we have our if-then statement. So if traffic matches any of this, right, we're going to go ahead and use the action, right? That's our then has accept, right? We're going to do this, right? We're going to go ahead and do some that, right? If we want to get fancy with it, right? Which of course, you guys being network security engineers, anybody that's watching this, we're going to make sure that we have UTMs assigned, right? Right? We're going to go ahead and set that, adjourn the log, and we're going to click OK. Right? So all of this is set up, right? Now, what happens here, right? And so whenever you go ahead and configure a firewall policy that has, that's checking for access and doing any inspections, right? What we're doing is we're compartmentalizing, the firewall policy to do a set of instructions, right? First, we're telling it, right, at the core, hey, this is how you handle traffic on the interface in which it ingresses, right? It enters, and it egresses, right? That it leaves, right? And so what is the FortiGate going to do? It's going to go ahead and do right? It's going to go ahead and do a couple of checks, right? When the user, right, a PC, right, on the local network is trying to make an initial connection attempt, it's going to go ahead and check first the source, right? The PC is going to say, does this fall into line, right? Once it checks that, it's going to say, now it's I can either accept or deny this communication session because you don't fall under that if statement of the firewall policy, right? Then if you do pass it, right, the FortiGate then is going to go ahead and check the rest of the policy and see if you qualify to allow traffic to go ahead and pass through, right? Some of these things you guys already know. Some of this may sound like a refresher, but I'm saying this for a reason, right? And so we're putting, of course, the user group, we're putting the subnet, right, in that policy. These are the things the firewall policy is going to check, right? We have our, a radius service set up. So it's going through all of these checks before it says, hey, I'm going to go ahead and allow traffic, right? And so, you know, we're using, a firewall. We're using a firewall account, right? That's sourced to a radius server, right? Right. We can also use, right, PKI users, right? We can use FSSO users, right? If anybody, right, belongs to the groups that we allow in that firewall policy, they'll have an authentication. It should be fine, right? Theoretically, if configured correctly, right? We can also specify, right? Maybe we have users that, hey, these users that are in this subnet, they only need to access the web, right? So they only need DNS and HTTPS. That's it. They don't need anything else, right? That's it, right? So we need to go ahead and allow this, right? So you can, and of course, it's typically recommended to go ahead and specify that actual service. Okay. One thing you guys need to know, right, is that whenever we open up a session, right, and maybe a PC is connected to a switch that's connected to that firewall, with any services, right, with all the services that's available to us, if you're going to go ahead and do any authentication, there are 4 protocols you need to go ahead and allow for that authentication to go ahead and work. And these are the 4. We need to allow the following. 1 is HTTP and HTTPS. 2 is 3 is FTP. And the last one is Telnet. Okay. Let me go ahead and try to find that. If I can find that, Telnet. And 5 is DNS. Right? We need to go ahead and allow these, right? Because users that connect in, right, all of these services are going to be used, right? Communication with the radius server, communication with locally, right? All these services need to be allowed, right? For, that password authentication to be sent. These are the protocols that's going to be used in that traffic between the server, between the radius client, which is of course the Fortigate, and that radius server. All of these things needs to go ahead and be enabled, because remember, we're doing active authentication here, right? Since we're not using a certificate-based system, right? We're not doing single sign-on, which is of course passive authentication, right? Which does an identity check in the background, right? We need to go ahead and note that. We need to make sure that we activate the service on the firewall policy. It is very important that you guys understand that. Okay. So with us still being on active authentication, just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and set it to all, right? Because of course the VM can act funny or what have you. Any questions so far? I feel like I've been talking for a while.
No, I don't have any for me.
Okay. Good to go. All right, so let's go ahead and let's do some checking, right? So if I go ahead and we're going to go ahead and stop this packet capture, right? Let's go ahead and try to log on. So let's go to our topology. Let's bring this bad boy back over. And let's go ahead and log into this machine, right? It's my Kevius PC. So let's go ahead and log in, right? And it's hanging off of gigabit 0/2 on switch 4. Okay. So let's go ahead and log in. All right. First, we're going to test layer 3 connectivity. We're going to check our IP configuration, and we'll go from there. So let's go ahead and blow this up. Right. Since we're running on Linux, let's do an if config. Right. Perfect. Right. So we have an IP address. So it's 10.10.1.100. Right. And so let's go ahead, and we know our gateway. Let's go ahead and ping that. So let's do a 10.10.1.1. We can reach it, right? Can we go ahead and reach, right? Can we reach the other private network now that the IPSec tunnel is up? Maybe if I didn't put commas, right? We can reach it, right? We're good to go, right? What happens if we go ahead and open, right? Open up a browser. see what happens. All right, and let's make sure. All right, we're going to test this by trying to get to FortiGate's 3 firewall. Let's see what happens. And while we're doing that, I'll go ahead and process that packet capture. All right, so now let's pull this up. Let's go ahead. Take a look. Take some time to go ahead and pull up. Let's see what's going on. Give me 1 second, guys. And let's pull up our configuration here. Do we have HTTP enabled? Let's do that. So the error that I made, of course, since we don't have certificates in our lab, I need to go ahead and enable HTTP itself, not just HTTPS. So let's go ahead and do that. We can't do it in the GUI manually, so we need to go ahead and do it in the CLI. So let's go ahead and do it on the LAN side. Yeah, so that'll be port 3, system interface, and port, oops, there we go. So allow access to HTTP, there we go, excellent. And let's do the same on FortiGate 3. What we're also going to do is we're going to go ahead and make a change. We're going to call this 10.10.1.25. All right, so we can go ahead and resolve it, do its thing. And we're going to go ahead and restart that PC. Let's close this. Let's go ahead and have it restart so we can get the updated information. So let's do that. And let's go ahead and do the same thing here. Do that. So for that PC here, we're going to go ahead and enable, all right, HTTPS. All right, so let's do edit port 3. There we go. And there we go. All right. So now that we have that set, let's go ahead and go here. And let's change this to our server that's going over the IPSec Tunnel. All right. Let's click OK. We got that set up. Excellent. Excellent. So now, all right, perfect. So now this is rebooted. While we're waiting, let's go ahead and reboot the Windows PC as well. All right. So while we're booting down the other side, let's go ahead and log into my Kevious PC. Oh. All right. So now we're back in. Let's make sure we got some configuration. Perfect. We got that squared away. All right. And now let's go ahead And let's double check one more thing. Right, let's make sure everything that we have, right? So now, of course, we have the right DNS server, right? .25. All right. So now let's do a few things, right? So we got this set up. Let's go ahead and first try to reach our firewall on our side. 1.1. Perfect, we can reach it, right? All good to go, right? Now let's go ahead and try to reach the other one on the other side. 10.10. I'm sorry, 172.16.1.1. Should be able to reach it, right? And so let's go ahead and check our logs, right? First, let's go ahead and check firewall policy, right? And so we see things going through the tunnel, right? Let's go ahead and capture all. Let's go ahead and capture all. And let's go ahead and make sure it generates a log. Let's go ahead and erase that. And let's do this as well. Because I want to go ahead and capture that traffic, right? And make sure we can go ahead and take a look at the logs after that, right? So let's go ahead and go to my Kevious PC, right? Let's go ahead and generate some traffic, right? Good to go. We're able to access it. Perfect, right? All that's working. Great, great. All that's working. All right, so now if we go ahead and go to the logs, we can see a few things, right? Right? We see, if we take a look at that log, right? We can go ahead and see, hey, right? The source was port 3, right? Destination was this, right? Of course, it accepted the session was closed, it worked, right? Don't worry about these denies, right? But why was it allowed, right? Why did all this pass through? Right? If we see here, right? It met the right, the if then statement, right? It was in the local subnet, right? And it went ahead and it was able to go ahead and reach the remote subnet. It's allowed. It's able to go ahead and touch, right, that remote network, right? It's not going to touch this northbound policy. Okay. Now, what if we make a change and we add this, right? We go ahead and add this right here, right? All right, we go ahead and add that. We do the same thing, right? Add a user. Carisha, please. We got that set. What will happen now? Right? Let me pull up a new browser just to go ahead and show you guys. Right? 172.16.1.1. Right? Let's give it a second. Right? But what's pulling up now, right, is an authentication page. Right? And what the firewall is doing now that we've added a group into that policy is now what the firewall is doing is authenticating a user through, right, a firewall policy, right? And this is, of course, it'll take time just because, certain graphics and stuff like that. But it's now going to go ahead and check to see if we are who we say we are, right? And so the subnet, that match, we need to go ahead and make sure we have the right user, right? And so this is going to pop up, right? So if I go ahead and type my Kivia and put in the password, if that's correct, I should now be able to access the internet, right? And so now the FortiGate, being the Radius client, is going to check the Radius server and see if I am a user there, right? And if I'm a user and if everything I configured was correct, I should be able to go ahead and access the internet and, of course, access the firewall that's on the other side of this policy, right? So let's give it a moment.
This makes sense though.
I'm glad. Of course, right, in you guys' enterprise environment, it'll be a little bit quicker, right? But let's go ahead and wait for it to pull up. All right, so firewall authentication failed, right? So it did not work. So something we configured is incorrect. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. Let's go ahead. And I actually didn't want to go there. All right. There we go. And typically it's probably because we're missing actual rules and what have you, right? We go ahead and check here. Right. Oops, typing in the wrong password. Whoopsies. Hope I'm not. Let's go ahead and go to that Windows server. Let's go ahead and check it. All right. All right. Let's go ahead and check it. Whoops. That's not good. All right. So we may just have a config issue on the server side. Let me go ahead and take a look. Give me 1 second. All right, let me go ahead and make a few changes. All right, once I do that, I go ahead and pull up that. Once I go ahead and set that up, all right, we are going to go ahead. Let's go ahead and do this. We are going to go ahead and allow that. And what I'll do here, for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and configure this as well. Make it a bit easy. O1. There we go. 10.10. Typically takes a few steps to configure Radius, but I want you guys just to get the concept of it. Let's go ahead and configure that service account real quick. There we go. Let's do that. Fortinet. And let's do right here, Fortinet. Perfect. Right. Perfect. Let's hit next, finish. Perfect. All right. Perfect. All right. All right. Okay. That looks good. Let's go to the other side and do the same thing. And let's go ahead and configure LDAP over here. LDAP's a little bit easier. Radius takes a few steps. OWAN server 01. There we go. 10.10.1.25. Regular. Fortinet. Go. This connectivity. And that's okay, right? That's perfectly fine. Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and do this. We're actually going to go ahead and do it in the CLI. And I'll tell you the reason why in 1 second. Right? And so the reason that we need to go ahead and do it in the CLI, just because whenever we press OK, right, using LDAP authentication, it's going to go ahead and immediately check if there's a connection, right? The thing is, right, if we don't have a correct connection, it's not going to work. And us not being able to set the source IP in the GUI, it's going to fail, right? Because it has to go through a tunnel. If it was on the same subnet, we would have no issue, right? So let's go ahead and set this up. 10.10.1.25, right? We're going to go ahead and do the source IP. That's going to be 172.16.1.1, right? And then we're going to do we're going to set go. Yep, I knew where I'm missing one more thing. User. There we go. Now that perfect. And let's check now. Okay. DC equals high DC equals net. One server, all one, now that. 10.10.1.25. Perfect. Let's go ahead. Config user LDAP. Let's set that source IP 10.10.1.25. One 172.16.1.1. Perfect. All right. Now we go back in here. All right. We need, of course, put in that username. Right, because that's the connector. All right. Go ahead and take a look at it. Right, so we got that, we got that. Fortinet, let's make sure I didn't tap finger it. Okay, that's perfectly fine. All right, let's take a look. Perfect. All right. Look. Let's make sure our tunnel is still up. Tunnel's still up, good to go. Let's check our LDAP server. And just for good measure, let's go ahead and delete this. I have seen that before. All right, so FORTINET's good, that's good. All right, let's check some config again. Execute ping options. We're gonna go ahead and source it. 172.16.1.1. And let's do it execute ping 10.10.1.25. Looks like I'm getting some failures. Let's go ahead and take a look and see why. And you know what? I know why we're getting failures. Let's go ahead and remove that user. There we go. Let's remove that. Make things less complex. There we go. And let's remove that. There we go, right? Because that's sourcing the radius server. So let's delete that as well. That's still being used. That's perfectly fine. So now that we remove that, there we go. So now we have pings, right? That was our blocker, all right? And now it's successful. Now, if we go ahead and test, right? And I'm still fat figuring it somehow. Oh, that's fine. I'm not worried. All right, so we're hit OK. We're good to go. Let me make sure I'm not typing your name in wrong. Where are we? Let's go ahead. Perfect. All right. So now let's go ahead and create that group. Let's go ahead and replicate that. All right. So we're going to create a new group. Let's delete that. Right. Same as before. Call it Carisha, please. Right. We're going to go ahead and create that group, that LDAP server. All right. We're going to go ahead and drill it down. All right. And we're going to go ahead. Right. Because we want to go ahead and just allow people that's in the beehive to go ahead and access the network. Let's go ahead and search for it. We're going to go ahead and add it. All right. Click OK. We're good to go. All right. So we added this group. Right. And now let's go ahead and do the same thing. Let's go ahead and add it to our firewall policies. Right. So we're going to go ahead and add it here. Right. Let's go ahead and add Carisha, please. All right. And so now let's go ahead and give this another try. All right. All right. So now let's go ahead and try to access. And first, let's do a little test. Let's see if we can still reach it via layer 3. 172. Let's go ahead and do a ping. 172.16.1.1. See if we can still reach it. Right? So it should fail, right? Because first we need to go ahead and authenticate before we have network access. So let's go ahead, pull this up. And let's do a HTTP, right? And we should get this firewall authentication screen. And let's see what happens. Any questions so far?
None so far.
Okay. Right. And let's just give it a shot to go ahead and pull it up. All right, so now that it's up, let's go ahead and see if we can authenticate. Go ahead and type this slow. All right, so we have a different screen, right? This is going to tell us we have access. So now you guys see pings are going through, right? And so that is what they call, right, authentication using a firewall policy. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, because it's a
Okay.
policy in place. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So let's go ahead and cancel this. Let's go ahead and stop this. One thing we need to go ahead and touch on. We touched on groups. We touched on authentication using firewall policies, right? And last but not least, right, we need to go ahead and touch on one last thing, okay? And that is authentication through captive portal, okay? So how would you configure that, right? So you would actually have to go ahead and go through this section here that's called security mode, right? And once you do that, right, it's going to give you an option, right? It's going to say, hey, you want to go ahead and use captive portal? That's only one option. So you're going to go ahead and use that, right? And so authentication, right? It's going to be local or external, right? We're going to go ahead and use local, restricted to groups, right? And the groups that we're going to pick, right, is our group that we created that's sourcing our LDAP server, okay? So we have that set, right? And we're not going to go ahead and exempt any sources. We're not going to exempt any destinations, right? And the last part, right? Because again, you can, this is an art form that you guys can do, right? Of course, by default, if you don't have any special images or what have you, it'll just use Fortinet images. But here, you can go ahead and say, hey, after they authenticate, to use a different captive, you know, a different image or captive, or bring them to maybe google.com or what have you. So we can go ahead and put a specific URL, or we can say, hey, now that they have authenticated using the captive portal, we can go ahead and continue, right, redirecting to their original request, right? So that's how you would go ahead and configure. You need to configure that, right, authentication using captive portal on the actual interface, right? Let's go ahead and do it because our test is going to be on, of course, Fortigate 3 with being on my previous PC. Okay. All right. So now let's make sure we configure this. There we go. Let's go ahead and check a few things. Let's check this again. let's, and that looks good. Okay, so that should be good to go. Let's go ahead and check our policies. Because we may have a misconfig. All that's good. Let's go ahead and check our policies here. Okay, so we have nothing there. And let's go ahead. Okay, so we're good to go. All right. Right. Let's check this. All right. Not fat fingering no more. Let's go ahead and create that user group because that's needed. All right. Perfect. Right. So we're going to search for the beehive. Okay. Perfect. We're going to go ahead and add that, right? Because we want to be very specific on where we're giving access to, right? And now we're going to go ahead and go to that inside interface because this is where we're going to test it, all right? We're going to go ahead and enable security mode, right? Restricted to groups. We're going to call it Carisha, please, right? Original request, hit OK. All right. So now let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and test it. Let me go ahead and pull up the topology so you guys can see that in the background, right? So that request is coming from here, and right, this is our source, and we're trying to reach our destination, which is right here, 172.16.1.1, that inside interface. Okay. Let's go ahead and pull up this PC, right? My Kevius PC, by the way. Let's go ahead and log in. And let's go ahead, while we're at it, let's go ahead and try to access that firewall again. See what happens. Give it a second. Let's wait for it to pop up. Give it a few seconds. And it's going to look a little bit different, right? And let me enable one last thing so you guys can see something. We're going to edit one. All right. And we're going to edit two. All right. And I'll tell you guys what this is in the future. Okay. Let's go ahead. Give it a second. right, it's loading, it's loading. All right, and so while this is loading, let's go ahead and take a look at something, right? And so with that config, right, because I need to go ahead and make sure I touch on those points, right? Like I told you guys, right, captive portal is configured on that interface, right? And so again, for this method, right, there's the only method for, right, for security mode is captive portal. You can't configure anything else, right? Just as a review, you can go ahead and host that captive portal either on the Fortigate or an external authentication server, right? Maybe, and when I say external, right, like you guys see right here, we can go ahead and configure an external server to come up with a page, right? Do the entire thing. We're doing it locally, right? Because we're telling the Fortigate to still be that LDAP client, right? That's going to go ahead and pass those credentials to the LDAP server. A little bit easier, okay? And of course, when we go ahead and reach the, right, we try to get onto the web, there is going to be a log on screen in, you know, Fortigate HTML format, okay? All right, but we are going to be enabled, and the big point that I want to tell you guys that we're going to be enabled on the first interface that we hit, right? And the interface that we're hitting first is 172.16.1.1. That's what we're hitting first, right? So let's go ahead, right? And of course, we sourced the group. Let's go ahead and check to see if it pulled up already. All right, looks like it pulled up, right? So let's go ahead and log in. Right? We're going to hit continue. Right? And let's give it a second. Right? Because there's one thing I want you guys to go ahead and see. You guys will probably need one for your career, but also it's mentioned on the exam. Once it finishes popping up, of course.
And this would normally be faster in like an enterprise environment, right?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
100%. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. With this is one of the downsides. I know you asked before with using, you know, virtual machines or what have you. It's going to be a bit slow, you know, especially if you don't have the right resources. And it looks like I failed. Let me go ahead and try it again. Okay. So that popped up. Everything looks good. That's good to go. And what I wanted you guys to see, and it looks like it didn't pop up just yet. Let's go to system. We're going to go to replacement messages. We're going to go to extended view. And we're going to go to disclaimer page. So what I did in the CLI, I enabled disclaimer, right? A disclaimer agreement or what have you, right? Terms of service or what have you, right? Or EULA, right? In other words, right? You can actually customize this for your organization, right? And you guys being the network security engineers, right? Leaning more towards security. This may need to be specific per the lawyers in your organization to make sure, hey, if we have guests come in or if we have end users in general, if they're accessing the network, they need to agree to these terms if they are using our internet, right? Them agreeing to these terms, saying, hey, yes, I agree, then they're going to go ahead and be given access, right? But that function is only enabled through the CLI. Remember, I told you guys the golden rule. Some things are configured in the CLI, some things are configured in the GUI, okay? But you can, of course, come here, come to system, come to replacement messages, and customize what's in the portal messages, right? And there's different things. It's not just this. You can go ahead and look at, block message, right? If you're sending an email, there's a whole bunch of authentications, right? A lot of things you can go ahead and set, right? For the exam, you just need to know how to get to replacement messages, okay? With that being said, right, there's a couple of things, right, you can go ahead and do, right, to go ahead and troubleshoot, firewall authentication, right? Told you guys about the dashboard. We can come here, go to user and devices, right? We can go ahead and go to firewall users. A couple of things, right? If we see something, right, maybe my key is authenticated, but it's not working, here's what we can do. We can go ahead and say deauthenticate, right? It's going to ask us, hey, are you sure you want to go ahead and deauthenticate? It's going to go ahead and deauthenticate, right? What does that mean? That means once she tries to exit the internet again, a pop-up page is going to pop up again, right?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So, like, when you just to make sure I'm following along, like how you click on the users and devices, it showed like my Kivia as an actual user there, but she's not configured locally on the firewall. She's configured in the Beehive group. Is that right? That's where it picked it up from? Okay.
That's correct.
All right.
Right? Because that's where we're sourcing our users, right? We have the LDAP server, right? The Fortigate, right, has a connection with that LDAP server, right? And so what happens, right, is that one, in the topology, the Fortigate is the LDAP client, right? The LDAP agent or the LDAP server is that server, right? Anytime somebody plugs into the FortiGate, right, of course, the switch plugging into the FortiGate, and it wants internet access, we configure the FortiGate to say, if you want to go ahead and access the network, you first need to be authenticated to the server. So those creds, I went ahead and typed in on my Kivia's PC. They're sent up to the FortiGate, and the FortiGate sends it to the LDAP server and authenticates that user. Now, what happens is that FortiGate, being the LDAP client, it's tracking every user that logged in. It's not saving the creds, it's just logging the user that logged in.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. All right. With that being said, there's one last thing I want to go ahead and touch on, right? There's roughly 5 commands. I already did 2 of them, right? Well, one of them, and of course, one of them represents the other. And I'm going to pull the study guide, right? There's a couple more I want you guys to log in to memory and to make sure you remember for the exam, right? You guys know about of course, the diagnose test, and this is just a course to test authentication using the method either radius or LDAP. But you also, right, there's 2 other commands, right? Or 3 other commands, right? One is diagnose firewall authentication list, right? And of course, that one, it shows authenticated user, associated groups, and their IP address, right? This helps, right? Whenever you have a policy that has groups in it, and you want to go ahead and authenticate, it'll show you all the authenticated users, and this is just in the CLI down. So what we saw on the dashboard, we can replicate in the CLI with a little bit more granular details, right? So that's what that diagnose firewall auth list is going to give us. Now, what if there's something going on in the environment? We need to go ahead and just clear everybody and make sure everybody just goes ahead and re-authenticate. My Kivia, being that network security engineer, can say, hey, let's just clear all the authorized users. She can go into CLI. Instead of going into GUI and hit deauthorize for each user, she go into GUI and go into CLI and say, hey, diagnosed firewall auth clear, and it'll clear all the authorized users. Okay. Last but not least, with great power comes great responsibility. I told you guys about the debug command. You have to be very specific if you use it and know what it's actually going to do. I recommend testing in the lab, but you can use the diag debug application FNBAMD command -1, right? And it's used to go ahead and troubleshoot active authentication, right? on the firewall, right? Meaning, again, somebody tries to log in, right, from a PC. Of course, what's going to happen, these logs are going to pop up, right? And just, of course, just for housekeeping, before you use any debug command, you need to go ahead and first enable debugs with that command, diagnose, debug, enable. That's what's going to make those logs populate. If you go ahead and configure that, you'll be able to actively track, right, in process, hey, am I seeing LDAP requests go through or not, right? And let me give you guys a scenario. Markivia being a network security engineer, Don being the user, he's reporting to the help desk or the NOC, hey, I can't authenticate. I can't get onto the internet. Something's going on, right? And your help desk tells Markivia, she can go ahead and put in this command, right? And say, hey, have your user, have Don try to log in. She can see what's going on, right? With these LDAP requests with this command. Okay? She can also go ahead and put the last two commands, right? Either if she's using LDAP or Radius to go ahead and test the actual user or test herself to see what's actually going on. Okay? And these are powerful commands to go ahead and troubleshoot firewall authentication. Okay? Any other questions?
No.
Okay. Well, guys, I know this was a long session, but we had a lot to cover. But you guys are now done with chapter 5, and you guys were moving on to chapter 6.
Sweet.
Okay.